Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Williams, and I am the Director of Support Services at AGI. Thank you for joining us today. If this is your first time, Alzheimer Group is a charitable organization that supports families and individuals living with dementia. Some of our services include individual and family counseling, support groups, activities for the person with dementia, and education workshops. Today's lecture is made possible by the generous support of the Lasner Learning Center and the Lindsay Memorial Foundation. Today, we are lucky to have Dr. Vincent Poisson. Vincent Poisson is currently employed in the role of State Manager at Dementia Australia. Vincent is a lead developer of Blokes in the Caring Role program, which has been specifically designed to educate and support male carers of people living with dementia. Vincent is currently enrolled in the Doctor of Public Health at the University of New South Wales. Vincent's research aims to explore the experiences of male carers of people with dementia in order to develop an evidence-based model of support for male carers of people with dementia. So we want to be thankful, Mr. Poisson, for your time. It's 6 o'clock in the morning for you today. So feel free for everyone to write your questions or comments in the chat, and we will have a question period at the end of your presentation to address anything that they want to explore further. So without further ado, please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I will share my screen. So we'll get the technicalities out of the way first. And hopefully that's going to work. Megan, can you tell me if you see the full presentation screen there?
It's perfect. Yes.
Perfect. Very good. All right, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Vincent Poisson. I'm currently enrolled in the Doctor of Public Health program at the University of New South Wales. I am also a state manager at Dementia Australia. We have been working for the past 11 years as well. Before I go any further, I am talking to you from Australia. As Megan said, it's 6 a.m. here. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am meeting with you today in Melbourne, Australia, Victoria, the Wurundjeri people. And I would also like to pay my respects to Indigenous elders, past and present, across Australia and Canada. So my research, the Doctor of Public Health at the University of New South Wales, comprised of 3 projects, and where I will be publishing 4 research papers. The phase 1 of the study will answer the following questions. Do male carers access Dementia Australia services differently to female carers? Do male carers approach the caring role differently to female carers? What are the barriers and facilitators to help seeking for male carers? And exploring health professionals' approach with carers of people with dementia. I understand that quite a few of you in the audience today are actually male carers, and I want to sort of emphasize that a lot of my slides will provide you with some of my research in looking at how you as a male carer sort of approach the caring role, and what are the insights that we've developed to support health professionals in the industry to better support you. For health professionals in the audience, well, I will be providing you with some tips and strategies on how to better approach and work with male carers. So really the aims of this program is to raise awareness about the increasing number of male carers of people with dementia. And I will provide a few more slides there. To flag the common challenges faced by male carers who care for a person with dementia. To validate and acknowledge the experience and approach of male carers, and to provide tips and strategies to all you present today to support males who are caring for a person with dementia. Megan, before I go any further, is the sound okay? Everything is working well?
Everything is great.
Perfect. All right, so I need to start with a few considerations first. There is limited research on male carers of people with dementia, and for example, my research as well has applied qualitative research methodologies, and so therefore the findings cannot be generalized and should only be used as a guide. I expect that for some of you, at some point during this presentation, you may think that the information presented does not match with your personal experience of either yourself as a male carer or for professionals in the audience, in the people that you've been working with. And that's perfectly correct. This is what I expect, because the information provided here is only a general guide. They should not be treated as hard black and white rules. Also, please note that most research studies, and there's not a lot of research studies in that field, including mine, have applied a binary definition of gender as inclusion criteria when recruiting research participants. That is, we've recruited people who identify as male or female, and we did not explore the experience of people who identify as non-binary genders. However, please note that this will most likely be the subject of my future research. Also note that the design of my research has also been based on 15 years of experience working in the field of dementia, in particular in capturing the lived experience of men who have taken part in the program I've developed. As Megan mentioned before, I've developed the Blokes in the Caring Role program, which is a program specifically for male carers of people with dementia. All right, so why have I been interested in doing my research on male carers? Well, across the world, we know that approximately 2/3 of primary carers are women. However, current estimates are likely to underestimate the true number of carers of people with dementia, because population surveys appear to underreport milder dementias. Also because people from a culturally and linguistically diverse background are often not included in research surveys, and also because population surveys tend to exclude people from remote areas. As such, research is pointing to an increase in the number of male carers. So, across all regions of the world, prevalence of dementia is higher for women than for men. In Canada and Australia, demographic estimates suggest that around 2/3 of people living with dementia are women. More than 65% of people with dementia in Australia and in most developed and high-income countries live in the community in their own house, and 85% of them live in their home and are cared for by a spouse or a partner. And that's quite important, given that most people live in their own home, and most people with dementia are female, and they are generally cared for by a spouse. And because that spouse very often is above 65, living in a heterosexual relationship, this suggests that in reality, there might be much more males out there who are caring for a person with dementia, but they are likely not readily identifying themselves as carers and or not accessing carer support services, thus not reflected in the carer surveys and population estimates. Research suggests that with the increasing number of people living with dementia in the future, and because dementia impacts much more females than males, we may soon see an increase in the number of male carers, and they might even surpass the number of female carers. In Australia, for example, between 2006 and 2011, we have seen a 20% increase in male carers versus a 17% increase in female carers. In the United States in 2008, men made up for 40% of family carers, which at the time represented a 21% increase from 1996 to 2008. Since women have longer life expectancy than men, men aged above 85 and older in Canada are more likely to live with a surviving spouse than women of the same age. For that reason, older senior men may be more likely to be caregivers for their spouse. For example, 17% of men were caregivers compared to 11% of women of the same age. In Japan, the population of male carers of people with dementia quadrupled from 8.2% in 1981 to 32% in 2010. Also, nowadays, and more so in the future, we are seeing more women in the workforce, working as professionals, which has increased the pressure on men to step into the caring role. As such, research suggests that current demographics and health trends will result in sons providing care in the future. The above points to the strong possibility that male carers are likely to represent much more than the reported 1/3 of carers of people with dementia. Looking at the report from Carers Australia in 2017, they reported that male carers are often not recognized as carers and feel overlooked or ignored by GPs. Therefore, they receive less services. Often workplaces are less supportive of men asking for non-standard hours to perform the caring duties. Also, men will seek practical support and will be reluctant to access support groups or carer programs. Therefore, Carers Australia recommended that services working with carers should be mindful of and prevent the unintentional exclusion of men. So what are we seeing? Currently, the public face of a typical carer is that of a female, often a wife or a daughter. But research suggests that with the increasing number of people living with dementia, there might be an emerging hidden carers group that is male carers. We expect that the face of the typical carer might soon be that of a male carer. So what are some of the common challenges of male carers? Well, if a few of you are in the audience, that will most likely sound familiar to you. But also, as I mentioned before, there might be many other challenges that you are facing. So note that I've had to limit this to the presentation. Historical societal norms dictate that the caring role and housekeeping duties are traditionally linked to being female. For some men, having to learn new skills in performing traditionally female tasks and readjusting their role or identity to that of a carer might create what some researchers have termed a gender role conflict and lead to increased carer stress and frustration. A male assisting a person with dementia may need to provide personal and intimate care, particularly as the illness progresses. Assistance may be needed with bathing and toileting. The person with dementia may also need help with dressing, hairdressing, and applying makeup, for example. For most men, not all, these would represent new and unfamiliar experience, which might make them feel uncomfortable. Also, generally, men do not have the extensive support system that most women have. Men often rely on their partners for emotional support and to maintain their friendships and family contacts that make up most of their support system. Unfortunately, as dementia progresses, the ability of the woman or the wife of a carer to provide emotional support and maintain friendships and family contacts will gradually be lost, thus leading to male carers becoming quite isolated. We also know that literature and our experience, my experience, for example, as a professional, says that male carers are less likely to identify the carer as are less likely to identify as a carer, and therefore they might say things like, no, I'm not a carer. I don't need this right now. Men are more likely to remain isolated, thus not aware of available help out there. It is common to hear people say, I'm fine, we are doing well right now on our own. Men are more likely not to recognize or to downplay the symptoms of dementia and to attribute these symptoms to other causes. It is common to hear men say, it's just a bit of stress. She'll be right. It's quite important to stress on this one because we've seen that quite a lot for me as a health professional, that men tend to downplay the symptoms of dementia. Also, men will ask for help only once they have reached a crisis. Often it might be a fall, or the person with dementia might have an infection. Some men will actually say, I will put my hand up if and when I can't do it anymore. Until then, and I'm fine, thank you. So, because men tend to downplay the symptoms of dementia, they will typically wait for a crisis before acknowledging the need to access supports from formal services. Unfortunately, by that stage, the person with dementia is likely to present with pronounced advanced symptoms of dementia and require crisis hospitalization. As such, it is not uncommon to hear that at the time of discharge from hospital, the person with dementia may be assessed by the hospital team as requiring advanced nursing care, thus prompting their transition into residential care. So in summary, there may be evidence that men are more likely to have specific needs and challenges that are not met with the service system and which could lead to poorer outcomes for their person with dementia they are caring for. And that's why I've been doing my research. So why do male carers struggle in a caring role? Again, I'm aware that some of you in the audience are male carers, so this might be quite interesting for you. Globally, there are societal and cultural pressures acting on men to abide by masculine ideologies, and as such, nurturing and caring behaviors do not conform with these ideologies. Men have been socialized to appear stoic, strong, and independent. For example, previously depicted in movies and advertising as the Marlboro Man, impersonated by John Wayne. That is, the strong stoic leader who is in control and doesn't show emotion. Men were taught not to ask for help, to preserve the image of the dominant breadwinner of the family. This is where, as a counselor, I have often heard male carers say, I've been taught from a young age that boys don't cry. Or I've also heard, I don't need to go to the doctor. My dad spent all his life as a farmer and never went to the doctor. So I do the same. We are stoic and resilient. And then when men ask for help, unfortunately, society also tends to respond by reinforcing feelings of shame, failure, and incompetence. As such, societal and cultural pressures act on men not to become carers. Additionally, because men don't ask for help, And because they don't attend support services, not all the time, but that's a general observation, well, services have progressively evolved to support those in attendance, that is, primarily a female audience. And these services are predominantly set up to address the female perspective of the caring role. For example, I've had men come to me after our generic carer education sessions, and they've expressed feeling out of place because the vast majority of participants were female, and they wanted to check if it was okay for them to attend the session because they were the only male present in that session. And they thus assumed that this must have been a female-only group. So men then perceive these services, especially if there are only females around when they attend, as inappropriate for their needs. It becomes a bit of a vicious circle. That is, services have evolved to support those in attendance, that is female. When men attend, they feel out of place because they are mostly female around, and in turn, services are perceived as inappropriate. So a lot of males, but I need to precise not all males, tend to prefer workshop type of settings where they spend time doing things while in the company of other men. There's not a lot of talking, but more doing. And it's quite important to have a table in the middle, I've found. So my research, as I mentioned before, comprises of 3 projects and will be published in 4 research papers. And we've tried to answer the following questions. Do male carers access Dementia Australia services differently to female carers? This question has never been answered before. Do male carers approach the caring role differently to female carers? And when I talk about male carers here, I specifically talk about male carers of people living with dementia. Then I've asked, what are the barriers and facilitators to help seeking for male carers of people living with dementia? And finally, I've interviewed health professionals to explore their approach with male carers of people with dementia. Okay, around 80% of carers. So first of all, to answer the question, do male carers access Dementia Australia services differently to female carers? The answer is overwhelmingly yes. Male carers access less services than female carers. As you can see here, 72% of people who access services at Dementia Australia are female and only 28% are male. Out of this, interestingly, 45% were identified as the wife, 22% as the daughter, 21% as the husband. And when we look at sons of a person with dementia, we saw that there were only 4% who access our services. So when you compare daughters to sons, you can already clearly see that there's a big difference there. And my research is looking at also at why are sons not accessing services. Again, when we looked at the access to our library services, and why did we look at library services? It's because library services are not sort of person-to-person services. It's a very sort of, you get a book or you try to access a resource. So there is no person-to-person interaction. And there, again, the same picture. 80% of our clients were female and only 20% were male who access library services at Dementia Australia. The next research question that we try to answer is, do male carers approach the caring role differently to female carers? And our analysis showed that, first of all, that there were gendered barriers to help seeking. That is, Males tend to wait until the person with dementia gives them permission to ask for help. They will often wait for their, let's say, wife, mom, or the female in the house who has dementia to allow them to access services. On the other hand, female carers will wait until the care needs of their person with dementia exceeds their caring capacity. So they will take that decision themselves when they can no longer do it. We also identified that their gendered preference for services. So therefore, men or male carers tend to prefer home help to spend more time with their person with dementia, whereas female carers tend to prefer respite to get more time away from their person with dementia. There were also gendered consideration about access to residential care. For men, they would consider placing their loved one in a residential care only if their own health became at risk. Whereas for female, they would consider placing their loved one in a residential care if their safety became at risk. So the difference was for male, their health, whereas for female, it's their safety. We also looked at burden experienced by carers, and we identified that for males, they had a functional type of burden, whereas females, they had an emotional type of burden. So for example, for females, they were really quite concerned about the emotional loss that is created by the despair and the progression of the disease. Whereas for a lot of male carers, they were quite concerned about the fact that they could not communicate well with their person with dementia anymore. And therefore, this created a lot of misunderstandings and sort of practical problems. When we looked at sons and daughters who are carers, we saw that for sons, they tend to manage and delegate tasks. They manage from a distance, whereas daughters, they were very, very much present in the care, so always on calls and fully immersed in the caring role. So to answer the question, do male carers approach the caring role differently to female carers? The answer seems to be yes, based on this table here. Now, the other phase of my research looked at what are the barriers and facilitators to help seeking for male carers. So we identified that there were a few barriers and a few facilitators, but we also, in that research, identified that there were motivators to take on or to remain in the caring role. We also identify what males want from carer support services, and we also try to differentiate the burden experienced by husbands and the burden experienced by sons. So the main barrier that participants, and we interviewed 32 male carers of people with dementia for that research, those male carers said quite consistently that the main barrier for them was their own male approach, if you want. And what is that male approach? Well, the first thing is that men tend to wait for a crisis before asking for help. What we tend to see, not all the time, is that men will try to wait for something to be quite wrong before asking for help. And then what we've also seen, and what they've said themselves, male carers, is that men tend to adopt what is termed in Australia the she'll be right attitude. That is, to deal with adverse events by convincing oneself that whatever is wrong will right itself with time. So just waiting for things, basically. And then also, one of the barriers is to operate in survival mode. Basically, because male carers are so overwhelmed with the practical task, and all these tasks are often quite new for a lot of the male carers, they fall into the survival mode of just operating on a day-to-day basis, basically, and it becomes hard for them to really see that there are services, there are supports out there. Also, we identified that, and the participants said that they really found that it was difficult when they had a non-directive health professional. That is, health professionals who didn't really give directive advice to them and mostly said, you tell me what you want, in a sense. We also identified that for a lot of male carers, if they had limited family support, it often meant that they didn't really have access to services. In terms of the facilitators to help seeking to access support, what we found quite consistently is that male carers really liked when there were directive health professionals who told them what to do, when to do it, where to access services. They really liked that. Also, they identified that having a strong family support, especially from female family members in the family, was really critical and helpful for them to access services. In terms of looking at what motivated men to access services, really, and to remain in the caring role, well, for a lot of men, of husbands specifically, or partners, it was around the marriage vows, really. They took it as their role to be looking after their wife or their partner. On the other hand, for sons, they articulated the need for them to remain in the caring role was because they felt the need to, or the obligation to pay back to their parent who had been caring for them when they were growing up as their child. So quite a different approach there. Also, when we looked at the difference in burden or the strain experienced by husband and sons, a bit of the same picture arose. For sons, they were quite stressed about the fact that they had to give up their life, often their professional life, to actually start stepping in the caring role. Whereas for husbands or partners, they were more, they expressed feeling like a strain opposed. That is, they had to really look at all the practical daily tasks of the caring role, and that was quite stressful. In terms of what males wanted from services, in that research, we identified yet again that they wanted to have access to proactive professionals and to be connected to other male carers or people with dementia. When we delve a bit deeper into what male carers wanted from health professionals, this is what we identified because it seemed to be quite a consistent theme from most of the participants. Well, first of all, it's professionals that provide directive and proactive advice. Professionals who really told them what they need to do now to fix the problem. Also, they also appreciated professionals who did home visits. That is to allow them to still be in contact with the professionals and them not having to actually get out of their house. They also appreciated services that initiated contact with them on a regular basis, so regular phone calls from a health professional out there. They also liked professionals who were providing them with the basic education around dementia and how to learn more about dementia. They also like professionals who acted as a care navigator for the aged care system. I'm not very well aware of the system in Canada, but I can tell you that in Australia, the aged care system is quite complex. So for a lot of male carers who are already quite overwhelmed with the caring role, they all said that they really liked a professional who allowed them to navigate that system. All right. Final piece of research, and this part will really benefit the health professionals in the audience. I interviewed 53, I surveyed 53 health professionals who work in the sector of dementia. I asked them quite a number of questions, and these are the main questions that I will show you today. The first one I asked is, are there differences between how females and male carers approach the caring role? 81% of health professionals in the industry said yes, that they thought that there were differences between male and female carers in their approach to the caring role. I've then asked, have you adapted your own clinical practice based on the carer's gender? 66% of them said yes, they did change their way of approaching the carer based on the carer's gender. I then asked, are there differences between how husbands and male partners approach the caring role in comparison to sons? 73% said yes, they did identify, and I will provide you a bit more information on this a bit later. And then I asked, are there differences in how sons approach their role as carers in comparison to daughters? Yet again, we saw the same picture. 79% of the health professionals said yes, they saw that there was a difference between how sons and daughters approach the caring role. I then asked, should services be tailored to better match the specific needs of male carers? Almost 80% said yes. And finally, I asked, do you see a benefit in a toolkit for health professionals in offering practical recommendations and advice on how best to attend to the specific needs of male carers? And 92% said, yes, we need a toolkit, something that will help us to better interact with male carers. So I will now jump into the recommendation and strategies for health professionals, but also for those male carers in the audience. I'm pretty sure that this information will be quite helpful to you. So first of all, please take note that male carers will typically adopt a task-focused approach to the caring role. Now again, not all male carers, but most. And this is why some male carers tends to spend quite a lot of time in their shed or fixing things around the house. For example, I had a carer who had been a builder all his life, and when his wife was diagnosed, he began building what he called a 100% dementia-friendly house. Unfortunately, at times, this can actually be quite problematic because the person then doesn't attend to the care needs of the person with dementia. So it is quite important to realize that there is a way that male carers will approach the role by trying to fix things, to manage the daily routine, and they will typically tend to expect females in the family also to provide some support. As detailed before, men will typically access help during and or shortly after a crisis. For example, the person with dementia might have a fall. Because they have reached a crisis and because males typically adopt a task-focused approach to the caring role, male carers are focused on fixing the crisis, thus not interested in emotional supports. As such, male carers will expect professionals to provide direct and proactive advice on how to fix their problem. They will have a strong dislike for professionals who might say things like, "You are the expert, you will know what to do when you need to do it." Also, be mindful of the social constructs of masculinity, which reinforce behaviors congruent to the image of a leader who remains calm, stoic, and in control. Therefore, help seeking is often associated to signs of weakness. Male carers might be resistant to get advice from a female, particularly if that person is of the same age as their daughter or granddaughter. As such, for health professionals in the audience, apply a task-focused approach in your rapport building with male carers. Ask questions about the task they are doing as carers. What is your primary concern? How have you managed these concerns? What strategies worked? Which strategies didn't work? And what are your thoughts there of why they didn't work? Identify and praise any strengths. Identify problem-solving approaches. Please, at this stage, especially at the rapport building phase, do not probe into feelings yet. Steer away from asking, how do you feel about that? Instead, ask, what are your thoughts there? Also provide solution-focused advice. That is, normalize the issue by providing information and education. Okay, be observant to detect any additional supports needed. Do not wait for male carers to ask for more help or to ask for the right question. Cut to the chase, please. Be directive, be proactive in offering advice. Use less feeling talking and less focus on emotion. An effective strategy is to set short-term goals, identify priority issues male carers want to address, write a list of short-term jobs and or tasks or actions. Compartmentalize the list and address one issue at a time. Offer practical steps, programs, or services that meet the identified goals or issues. It's also quite important in my experience and probably the collective experience at Dementia Australia to provide information and education. Use visuals. Do not be scared of using visuals like these that show images of the brain and how dementia can cause quite a lot of damage to that brain. Also, use meaningful analogies. Tap into the current or past mode of operating while at work. Show where and how to get help for domestic help. It's not uncommon that I might hear men who are talking to me as a professional. They might say to me, I don't need help now because I'm fit and I'm healthy. Or I don't need help now because I've got it under control. We are managing well for now. Or I'll ask for help when I really need it. My advice is always to call the dementia helpline, to delegate the work to those who are around, to start early as possible because dementia is a progressive disease. It's okay to do a bit of a trial and error for services and plan for the long road ahead. For health professionals again, be directive. It's often what I've found this question to work well is to ask, what if something suddenly happens to you? Because I've identified very often that a lot of men are very independent, they are managing well, and therefore everything is relying upon themselves. But what if something was happened to them and they are out of the picture? You know, for you in the audience who are male carers, think about what if something was to suddenly happen to you. Yes, you're controlling everything, but if you are out of the picture, what would happen to your loved one? Pay attention to your diet as well. If possible, do some exercise. Recharge your physical and mental health, and as much as possible, arrange respite. It is also important to link male carers to other male carers out there. You know, there are many groups out there, and I will now talk to you about one group that we've created in Australia and that I've developed, which is called the Blokes in the Caring Role Program. This program is a 4-week workshop for male carers where we provide practical strategies and we link them to other men who share the same experience as them. And they are often delivered by a male facilitator. The method of the program, as I said before, it's 5 consecutive sessions over 4 weeks. The program runs for 3 hours. We typically have a maximum of 8 participants, and it's run by 2 male facilitators. We provide information and education about dementia. We provide practical strategies around how to better communicate with the person with dementia, but also we spend quite a lot of time around self-awareness. In the 3rd week, we talk about grief and loss, which is quite a complex topic. And for a lot of men, they don't realize that they might be going through grief and loss. And finally, in the 4th week, we do a bit of planning. So what works really when we organize this group? First of all, we use what we call male-friendly language. we used words like let's work together than rather let's talk together. Let's manage things. It's better to use the word workshop than groups. And also what we do is that we use less written content and we use a lot of visuals as well. We use PowerPoint slide, we use whiteboards as well. We actually think that it's quite important to allow men to be with each other in these sessions, and therefore we create and we allow time for extended breaks where we have a bit of food around a table and we just let men talk with each other during the break, for example. The feedback from participants who've taken part in this program has been that they were relieved that there were other men around, because as I mentioned before, for a lot of men, when they attend groups, they are often the only one in the audience. The group was very supportive and helped me understand the challenges ahead, as my wife is at the early stage of dementia. So, as a summary for my presentation today, it is important to note that male carers are on the rise. Services, unfortunately, are not yet adapted to support male carers. Men will typically wait for a crisis before asking for help. Men will approach the caring role differently to female carers. Male carers tend to apply a solution and a task-focused approach, and therefore, as a health professional, if you're in the audience, please apply a solution-focused approach when you're supporting men. If you're a health professional, be directive and proactive in providing advice. Please steer away from probing into feelings, at least not until you've developed a constructive rapport with the person. Facilitate connections and communication with family. And finally, facilitate access to carer groups, particularly male carer groups. We are currently developing a toolkit for health professionals. It's not yet out there, but it might look a bit something like that, where we provide very sort of short practical examples. And this toolkit has been based on my research and has been developed when working with 53 health professionals in the industry. You may also be interested to actually browse our Dementia Australia website on our library guides, where there's plenty of information on male carers or people with dementia. All right, that's it for me today. If you have any questions, I'm ready for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that deeper understanding about male carers and their needs. Please feel free to write in the chat or in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen if you have any specific questions for Mr. Poisson. I do have a couple. So I noticed that for your support groups or the carers and blokes that you had male, I guess, male facilitators. And often in this type of profession, you don't have as many males who are, becoming, at least in Canada, social workers and things like that. Is this imperative or is this just an added bonus?
It's a fantastic question, Megan. So I've actually, and I want to do a bit more research there. I've actually asked a lot of carers, what do they think if we had a female facilitator? And for a lot of them said, well, it's fine, it will be good. However, then it's often followed by, but we feel more comfortable. For example, one said, I didn't have to dress up and it's okay for us just to talk to each other and we feel more comfortable. So Megan, practically, I know it's quite difficult to find health professionals or male health professionals, but for many males, they tend to feel much more comfortable when it's a man-only group, but it hasn't been researched yet.
Okay. And I have a question. Just as, social constructs are changing and, how men and women, their roles are changing, over time, typically, I guess I'm going to say, maybe more males are helping out in the household, or taking more action with the children and things like that. So do you see this research evolving over time?
Yeah, again, fantastic question. Yes, absolutely, Megan. Yes, of note, in the male carers I've interviewed and researched, there were quite a few who were quite younger and, in their 30s, 40s. So yes, they did have a different approach. Yes, they were much more involved in the family. Yes, it was a bit easier for them to sort of step into the typical household duties. So there's no doubt about that. So for the generation who are currently, let's say, above 65, it's typically harder for them. But those under 65 or maybe around their 40s currently, it is a bit easier. However, what I've noted is that there is still a very, very, very strong adherence to masculinities and the social constructs of masculinity. Often I will hear these younger men still say things like, I'm the breadwinner of the household, I'm the one in control, and I need to keep things in control. So there's still a bit of that.
Okay.
And I would really like to study this in more detail. Yeah.
Keeps going. Okay, I
Yes.
do have one question following the question about, having a male counselor.
Yes.
The question is, if an organization is not able to provide a male counselor for, say, for example, a group or something like that, or just
Yeah.
one individual counseling, should the female counselor address this with the client when she meets the male care? And if so,
Yes, I think it's a really great suggestion. Yes, address it straight away. As I mentioned before, male carers tend to prefer directive professionals. They prefer people to say exactly what's happening, and so therefore they will actually like it when you say, you know what, I am a female right now. We do not have a male carer. Is that going to be a problem? And if it is, how can we address it, basically?
okay. Okay,
Yeah.
so at AGI, I see someone made a comment that
Yeah.
one male carer doesn't have a problem with the fact that there is a female group leader. And it's very interesting because, at AGI, we have different support groups, and one of the support groups, about half of the participants are males. So
Yeah. Yeah.
always have to say that,
Ah,
not we don't want to overgeneralize, because over the many years at AGI, there are many males who are very open with communicating their feelings, and also this solution focus, which you said.
Yeah, absolutely, Megan. And this is why I started my presentation with these considerations, because it would be incorrect of me to say, yes, it applies to all males, because it's not true. I've seen so many exceptions to the generality. What I've presented here today is a general rule for what applies to most, especially for those who are, let's say, currently above 65 and tend to represent the majority of carers who are there.
Okay, perfect. I have just a comment from Laura saying, thank you so much for your clear presentation. I really appreciate your advice and tips of catering to male carers. I also, just one last thing, I see very often, you talked about the crisis and how males tend to wait for a crisis, but I also see that male carers sometimes will come in for this information part first, to understand what maybe resource would be available or services in the future. And then, yes, maybe until there's a big change, then they can kind of go in their toolkit and say, okay, we need to call here for this service or another service.
Yes, great observation, Megan. Yes, and again, it follows this very task-focused approach. It's a really good example of a task-focused approach. What can I do now to try to learn more about how to fix my problem? So therefore, I take part in an education session. And then what I've learned, I will try to apply it at home until, unfortunately, something goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just another, I think I just want to stress, based on one of the feedbacks, is that how can males access information? So very
Mhm.
often, when you call certain organizations, say, for example, like at AGI Alzheimer Group, you
Mhm.
don't necessarily need to give your name. You can just
Yes.
gather information. You can call anonymously. You can walk in. You can go on
Yes.
websites. You can send emails. So it is quite easy to access some type of support or resources. You can join
Yes.
email newsletters and things like that. So um, those are some tips that I would like to share that people can
Yes. And also, please feel free to access the resources on the Dementia Australia website, which is available to everyone around the world. And if you if you access our library guides, and under our library guides, you type men in the caring role, then you will see that there's plenty of information specifically for men.
Yes, and it's a great website and a great resource. So I'd like to take this moment to thank you, Mr. Poisson, for your time getting up
Pleasure.
early. And I think that although, the system maybe in Australia would be a little bit different, I do think things that you have spoken about the needs of male carers and how to approach them are extremely relevant all across the world. So
Yeah.
again, thank you. For those of you, you should be getting a survey either probably tomorrow, along with a recording of today's talk to refer back to, and it will also be on our YouTube page in the future. So thank you very much
My
and have
pleasure. And Megan, I'm happy to take questions in the future if anyone in the audience didn't have a question now, but they might think of a question later. So I'm happy for any one of your team to
perfect.
send me the questions.
We will send them our way. So please don't be shy and reach out to
Pleasure.
AGI. So have a
All right.
great day. Bye,
Take
everyone.
care. Bye bye, everyone.